A few years ago, I researched and wrote the animation strategy for Film London, which involved speaking with almost every London-based studio. And alongside the very real need for commercial support, it emerged that animation was one of the more diverse and inclusive sectors of the media industry. Still, more could be done to attract and retain a workforce that identifies as having a disability or long-term health condition. And over the last few years, these LIAF panels and training sessions that Film London has run have looked at how neurodiverse talent can find the right home and give studios access to a deep pool of neurodiverse creative skills that may have previously gone unnoticed. This morning, we're going to take a different look at inclusion. And in joining me are 4 people involved in animation in different ways who may have differing or the same perspectives about sight, hearing, and speech diversity. We shall discover. But before I introduce the panel itself, I'm going to play you a short video if I can find it on my very clever laptop thing. Here we go. Right, I am going to share my screen and I'm going to play the video right now.
Imagine if everyone in your life who has a disability suddenly just disappeared. Oops, there go the 10% dyslexic, the 13% hearing impaired, the 10% with sight loss, diabetes, arthritis, learning disabilities, depression, facial disfigurement, dementia and stroke, asthma, speech impairment, wheelchair users, multiple sclerosis, migraines, anxiety, sickle cell, syndrome, amputation, Parkinson's, brain damage, cerebral palsy, RSI, epilepsy, muscular dystrophy. Before we know it, there'd be no one left. There are more than 1 billion people with disabilities worldwide, and the number is growing. Yet how many of us, when we hear this word disability, automatically click to the old assumptions? Nothing to do with me, it's just a few wheelchair users, blind people, dogs. Doctors and charities take care of them. When actually the experience of disability, the unfairness and disadvantage that it brings, is very much about me. In fact, about all of us. About our experience as we go through life, and about getting older, which most of us would like to do. Actually, we all know human perfection is rare. Why bother with the Olympics if everyone can do a 3-minute mile? The real problem is our sad tendency to make assumptions about each other on the basis of labels. How we ourselves expect to be treated is changing as we recognize that we all have a basic right to respect, dignity, and choice. We need to replace the unacceptable old focus on medical labels with the new focus on individual potential, dignity, and human rights. The old brain makes assumptions. Everyone just knows that blind people can't use the internet. The new brain asks, how could this talented blind researcher do this job if we were clever? Simply put, impairment is what happens to you, disability is what we do to you. Refuse the ramp, refuse flexi-time, insist you apply online even though the technology won't let you, refuse to let you use a different keyboard, assume you are just not worth the bother. That old click comes through especially loud and clear when you hear the traditional challenge. So what is the business case for hiring disabled people? But just think, nobody asks, what is the business case for hiring, say, Canadians? Everyone knows some can do the job, some can't, some have the talent, some don't, some need adjustments, some do not. We don't generalize about 35 million people labeled Canadians. Why on earth do we still generalize about more than 1 billion people labeled disabled? And yes, I am Canadian. And listen hard to the disabled graduate's new brain reaction. Why do you need a business case for treating me properly? Business Disability International wants to start a brand new conversation which drives a global revolution as disabled and not yet disabled come together to ask, how do we replace the old brain with the new? And in case you're wondering who this Canadian is, I'm Susan Scott Parker, Chief Executive of Business Disability International.
I found it. which is good. The panel that I've got with me today are, as I said before, have different perspectives, different ways of working within animation. I'm going to start with introducing Rebecca Atkinson. Rebecca has over 27 years of experience across TV production, online and print journalism. She's the writer, creator and EP of Mix Mups, which is a 52-part animation series for Milkshake and Channel 5. Rebecca herself is partially deaf. She's worn hearing aids since the age of 3, and she became progressively partially sighted as an adult. Shabaaz Khan. Shabaaz is a creative and dedicated animator with a strong background in 2D animation. He's recently graduated and has won some student awards. He says of himself, "I'm unlike other animators. I'm partially sighted due to a tumour behind my eyes, which took 70% of my eyesight, although that's never stopped me from achieving my dreams. And along the way, I've made many friends and proved even more wrong." Paul Miller. Paul's the founder and director of Rory Studio, which is an award-winning arts organisation working across illustration, animation and live theatre. As a deaf British Sign Language user, his work centres on celebrating and increasing visibility of deaf culture within mainstream spaces. Paul wrote and directed The Gingerbread Witch, which is an award-winning animated short film and a touring theatre production, and his work continues to champion, collaborate, accessibility and joy. And John Mortimer. John's an artist, animator, educator and researcher. He grew up in a hard of hearing household and brings a personal understanding of accessibility and inclusion to his work. His new short film, New Science for Animation, explores ways of engaging with various audiences by working with deaf actors and a more authentic and emotionally resonating experience. I'd also like to very quickly introduce Melissa Skinner and Hayley, who are our BSL interpreters for the session. So if I could come to Paul first. Now, Paul, your work it celebrates deaf culture. How do you define deaf culture?
Hi, everybody. My name is Paul. It's nice to meet you all. So I was born hearing and I became deaf at the age of 3. My family are all hearing as well. And they don't really sign, so it was difficult to communicate. And I communicate through lip reading, and I'm a really good lip reader now. I'm a native BSL user and communicate with sign language. Most of the time, I can feel quite isolated. Everyone's kind of talking around me. I'm deaf, so I kind of don't feel like involved in that conversation. I'll often write things down as a way to communicate. In terms of deaf culture, it's very deeply visual. It's a way to kind of visually express and has a very strong connection to things like art, animation, film and theatre. I was always really interested in comic books, and my favorite being superhero stories, since I was younger. My English isn't that great. I'm first language BSL user, so I rely a lot on visual, which is why comic books were really, really accessible to me. Very visual way of storytelling. And I also, I grew up on watching a lot of animation on TV in a very visual way. I think I live in both worlds, deaf and hearing. I've got lots of hearing friends and we communicate through lip reading, through gestures, whatever kind of works in that moment. I'm not focused on one area. I'm very aware of both. I think that answers the question.
I think it does. Thank you very much indeed. Answers it very, very clearly. My next question is and excuse the pun, but what drew you to animation initially?
So animation, really, when I was younger, I used to watch a lot of animations on TV. Not really live action, but I would focus a lot on animations. That was where I was most passionate about and most interested in. Like shows like He-Man, for example, Battle of the Planets as well. That was something I was really, really, really enjoyed. Lots of Japanese animation. I just really found it really interesting to watch, very visual, and I really enjoyed that. But my absolute favorite animation from Japan is called Akira. It's fantastic. Really, really amazing. I've watched it so many times, I can't remember. I just keep watching it on repeat all the time. It was my absolute favorite. When I went to university, I studied FD illustration and animation at the same time. And that was very much focused on on illustration, but I wasn't really that interested in animation at that time. It was a bit too kind of structured, a bit too formal, not so much for me. So I was really interested in children's books and children's books kind of illustrations and comics as well, of course. When I finished university and I'd graduated, I met a man called Bob Duncan. He's based in the Northeast and deaf himself. And he was working in TV and animation and in different areas and worked for a company called Signpost. I think that's how you say it. I think that's what it was. Yes, Signpost with ITV and was working in that space. And he had a look at kind of my portfolio, my illustration portfolio and what I was doing and picked up on one and thought, oh, that, it's called Rory's Teeth. And he asked me a bit more about it, asked me some more information, asked me, and I kind of wasn't really sure at the time. I was a little bit not really sure if that's where I wanted to go, but I thought I'll give it a go. I'll try, and I applied for this opportunity, and I absolutely loved it. It was a really, it was a very different from what I was doing at university. It was kind of I could kind of come up with my way of doing things. And it went to several film festivals and won quite a lot of awards, which was amazing. The feedback was great. And I thought, I'm going to carry on in this space. I'm going to carry on with the animation. When I do create animation, it's not with that many words. There's no dialogue at all. It's very visual. So I don't, and movement and facial expressions are really important in the animation that I create. So a lot of deaf people maybe don't have high levels of English because BSL first language users. So that's my aim, is to create animation where it's not so relying on dialogue and can be a lot more visual.
Thank you very much. I think what I do now is I'm actually going to play a clip of your animation, The Tales of Victor, the Misfits creator. And I apologize, the piece is about 30 minutes long, so I'm going to come into it a little way down the lines just so we can get into the style and everything else of it. And this time I will do my absolute best to play it full screen. I apologise for cutting that short. I was absolutely transfixed as I was when Paul first sent it over to me. Um, and Paul, I'm coming back onto that. There was inspiration in that. I'm imagining because of you being deaf into having a central character there who was also unable to hear. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I wanted that deaf character. So when I was growing up, I would read books, and all of the material that was available to me. I wasn't able to find any deaf characters within any of that material, which is very disappointing. So I decided that I needed to create my own. So I would create my own stories, making sure there was a deaf character within the stories and showing that they were equal to any other character. As I mentioned before, my animation doesn't use vocalized words. It uses the visuals and the facial expressions, and it's really important for deaf people to have access to that visual information. And managing also to get a bit of sign language in there, which is incredibly difficult in an animation space because it's a 3D language in a 2D space. So with the manipulation of the joints that you need to move, to get the sign language into animation is not very easy, but I did manage it, so I'm very pleased with that. I've written and published my book, The Gingerbread Witch. And at the start, it was a children's book, and that did do quite well on Amazon. So there was a lot of feedback after that was released. There was a lot of sales from that feedback, and they really enjoyed the story. So I decided to work on that and for it to become an animation. It took 6 months of work to do that transformation from book to animation, and then sent that off to international film festivals, deaf and hearing festivals, and was actually quite staggered. Couldn't believe that I'd won so many awards for it as well. So that was a fantastic experience. So I thought, why not then move on to changing it into a theatre space? So that full production, a professional production of work has been fantastic. There's a fantastic team involved, including projections of the animation, backdrops that work together to make that a really well thought out production. And I am doing a new piece of work linked to the clip that you've just shown, that has going out to festivals, and that will be transformed into a theatre production. That work is ongoing at the moment. So I'm doing 3 jobs really. I'm doing the books, the animations, and then the theatre shows.
Fantastic. And I don't know why you're surprised that your work wins awards at festivals. I think it's fabulous.
Thank you.
And thank you, Paul. We'll come back to you in a little bit. I want to now move on to Rebecca, if I could. Now, Rebecca, you are the creator, the executive producer, the sole writer of Mix Mups. And what I think I might do before we get into our conversation is I am just going to play a very short clip of Mix Mups.
Okay.
Time to play.
Hey, we're off! Go! Yeah! Yay! Come plunge!
Follow me.
Fabulous. I I do love that. It's been very, very successful as a show for Milkshake. What was the inspiration for you to come up with something like that?
Well, it took 6 years to create that show from conception to getting it on screen. So I, like Paul, I grew up deaf and I watched a lot of TV, but there were no subtitles on TV in those days. So animation was something which was visually very interesting if you're a deaf child. So I always loved animation. I went on to work in kids TV, not on animation, but just live TV. And then I worked at the BBC for a long time, and then I had some kids and my eyesight started to deteriorate. I got a guide dog. And in that moment when I got a guide dog, I suddenly had this epiphany that there was no representations of disability in children's industries, in toys, in books, in TV. And this was about 10 years ago. So I started something called the Toy Like Me campaign, which was calling on the global toy industry, so the Legos and the Playmobiles and the Barbies of this world, to better represent 150 million disabled children worldwide. Whilst I was doing that campaign, I did some consultancy, design consultancy for Playmobil around representation and how to create authentic representation within their figures. What came back from them after the consultation period was some design iterations that were really obviously still seeped in stereotype. And at that point, I thought, right, it's not as easy as just asking the industry to represent disability authentically, because most of the people in the industry are non-disabled themselves. So I thought at that moment, I was like, I'm going to have to do this myself. I'm going to have to go back to my TV writing experience and create an animation and a TV premise and a preschool brand, which does disability in the way that I think it should be done. And so I started drawing and writing and creating all those characters, and also looking in detail at the representation and how I was going to approach it differently in that show. And so that then led to a meeting with McKinnon and Saunders over in Manchester, who took the project on and worked with me for many years to sort of bring it to life, bring it to fruition. So its roots are in the Toy Like Me campaign and the need for more representation on screen, but it ended up with me actually having to take matters into my own hands and grow representation off screen, and become the creator of that show and the exec producer of that show.
And how do you, I mean, as an exec producer and writer, you're pretty much sitting at the top of the tree, if you like, the American sort of showrunner. So as somebody with hearing loss and sight loss, how do you communicate with quite a big animation team in terms of getting ideas across and getting feedback and commenting on things? Did you have to create special processes for that?
Well, yes and no. I think first of all you have to be aware, the audience need to be aware that hearing and sight loss is a huge spectrum. Mm-hmm. I've got 2 hearing aids. English is my first language. I can sign, but I can use the phone and use Zoom. So I'm at a different place in the matrix of deafness. With my visual impairment, I've got tunnel vision, so I can see a screen. So ironically, I can work fine in the home, but I need a guide dog to move around safely outside. So what I'm seeing in the centre is quite clear. So in fact, my vision is kind of built for the small screen. So in terms of working with the team over at McKinnon and Saunders, one of the sort of catchphrases of Mix Mups is "there's always another way." So in the show, the little lucky louver bird always says at the end, "Oh, they've solved a problem," and she goes, "Oh, there's always another way." There's always another way is actually a metaphor for disabled living. It's a sort of secret metaphor within Mix Mups that there is always another way. So when it came to the production process, I was very interested in playing with the conventions of the production process and looking for another way to do things. So we used WhatsApp a lot. So there was a team of 6 animators, stop frame animators. They had a direct line into me on a WhatsApp group for animators. So every single thing that they shot, they could put it in there and I could give them feedback in terms of authenticity. Because what I realised was, okay, so I've got this character that's blind that I've written, but the animator's got no experience of blindness. So how am I going to communicate those subtle body movements and gait and the way that a blind person might interact, or partially sighted person, as this character is, might interact with the world around them? And so the way we came to kind of reconcile that was to say, okay, we're going to remove hierarchy, because having an executive producer who sits at the top and the animator can't talk directly to them, it's not how you get your best creative work. I wanted them, that person, to come straight to my door and be able to say, how is this character that's partially sighted going to do the colouring in this scene? And I was able to say to them, well, bring the child with partial sight is going to be bringing the pen and the paper up closer to their face. So I was able to kind of feed back into that in a very direct way. So I think trying to strip away hierarchy in that instance is how we got it done, because I felt too many times we have a non-disabled creator and a consultant who's disabled, and it's going through loads of different brains and what's coming out at the end is still inauthentic. So having that direct relationship with the animators and the design team was really, really helpful.
Paul, I want to, if I can, quickly come back to you on something which I noticed in your animation that we saw, and that Rebecca has just mentioned, because in the clip that we saw from your piece, there's music and there's effects, which you obviously can't hear. So did you have to trust implicitly your composer and your sound effect designer in order to get the audio bit of your animation right?
So I used somebody who I trust absolutely to come in and make sure that the music in the office where the service area, where the dancing, the stage area where people would come and listen. So making sure that they could hear what I was expecting them to hear. So that works really well, using that trusted person to come in, and every time you have somebody new to create music, you also need that. I also need that other person to come in to make sure it matches, so that I get that trusted feedback loop, and then we can make the adjustments that are needed, and that works really well.
So again, it's, Rebecca, it's a bit like yourself saying, having that trusted team around you and knowing that they can talk directly to you as the creative vision.
That's right, but also we've got to remember nobody is good at everything. So even hearing people, not every hearing person is good at music. So it's just the same level of trust that has to go into any collaborative relationship between creatives, that one person has got a skill set that another person hasn't got. So I can't animate. I have to call in the animators. Even if I could see, I don't think animation is going to be my skill. I'm not patient enough. So I think, you have to recognise that actually it's not really about disability in these cases. It's about just calling in the right person with the right skill set. And I think that deaf animators probably do have a skill set that is really, really unique. And perhaps they have, because you grow up visually and looking and scanning the world for visual clues, those skills lend themselves perfectly to animation. So I would love to see more deaf, and I'm talking about not necessarily deaf, partially deaf people like me, but fully deaf people, sign language users, because it's such a visual language. And it's so much in the facial expressions, and there's so much reading of body language that deaf people do, that to be able to translate that onto screen, I think there's a whole untapped well of animation potential there that hasn't really been explored. Well, Paul is starting to explore it, but that there's a skill set there which is quite unique.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's interesting what you said about you couldn't be an animator beat yourself because you don't have the patience.
No,
Which is
I couldn't sit in a room alone for more than 2 minutes to do the animation. No way.
Well, that's a fabulous segue into Shabaaz, who is an animator. And Shabaaz, are you a very patient person?
Yeah, I would probably say so. Yeah.
Now, Shabaaz, coming to you just for a little bit, did you always want to be an animator right from being quite young?
I've always liked films and cartoons and especially superheroes. And I've always been a creative person, always drawing and whatnot. And my art teacher actually in college, I did an art and design course, and that's where the teacher started to see an occurring pattern within my work, um, sort of like characters and facing appearing my work. And he suggested for me to go into animation, and it just clicked from there, really.
Interesting. We all need that sort of, as we're sort of coming up, sort of looking at what we might do as, a career or a life. We need that one person who sort of goes, oh, do you know what? You could do this for a living. You might be good at this. You when did you lose your sight? Were you or have the damage to your sight? Were you quite young when that happened? And did it at some point? No, because you want to be an animator. You've seen the opportunity. Did what happened to you with your sight damage your passion and drive and self-belief that you could work in the industry?
Yeah, so I lost my sight at the age of 10, um, due to I had a tumor behind my eyes, and I had an operation to try to remove it, and it went unfortunately went badly, and that's how I lost my eyesight. Um, and I've always had teachers, like especially in high school, tell me to not do art, because I'm visually impaired, to not go into the field. Um, and that's like kind of give me a boost, like to prove them wrong, to say that you don't have to be like fully have full eyesight to do art. And I've always had people support me in like college and uni, and especially family wise, um to prove them wrong. And our doctors tell me I wouldn't be able to even get into college, never mind into uni. And I graduated last year, and yeah, just to prove them wrong, it gives me that passion to do what I do. Yeah.
Brilliant. I think what I might do, you sent me some clips of your work. So what I might do is share some of that now, if that's all right with you, because it's really great stuff. I thought I'd leave that frame up just for a little bit longer because it's got your email address in, so people can now email you and offer you work. When in that clip, there was a short piece of you actually doing some animation, and you were really quite close to the screen. Do you have to work that closely when because of your eyesight?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like digital, I do have to kind of like work up close to see what's going on. I use like certain magnifiers within like technology and whatnot. But yeah, and just to focus on the actual animation really and frame by frame what's going on.
Right.
Probably that close, yeah.
Okay. And there seem to be some, I don't know, some music themes going on in that clip reel and stuff like this. Does music play a part in what inspires your work?
Yeah, a little bit. I get inspired by a certain like, especially about around children, around just messing about and their creativity. And music, I think they say music is 50% of animation, sound is 50% of it. Um, However, I do like the old like silent Disney movies. I think
Oh
they're
yeah.
quite well, and just to really focus on the um body language and the facial expressions of a character can be quite hard and but it's it's challenging for me.
Mm.
Yeah, so not a lot of my animations don't have like actual speech. They're mainly just background music. So yeah.
And you graduated, was it last year you graduated?
Yeah, yeah.
And how have you found it since then in terms of looking for work and finding work and securing work? Is it and animation is not in the healthiest of places generally at the moment in terms of an industry. But have you found any specific challenges yourself in seeking work?
Yeah, I think I have approached a few studios about getting even just some sort of work experience, and I think when they see that I'm partially sighted and it is quite a visual subject, they kind of like back off and
Mm.
they don't really get involved. Um, and it can be a challenging factor. I don't think that my site should exclude me from doing any sort of work really. So yeah.
No, I think it's to me anyway. I mean, it's I don't run an animation studio, but I think going back to something that Rebecca said, about people missing out on a lot of talent because they make an assumption that somebody who's got hearing loss or sight loss won't be able to do it. And it'd be very interesting to talk to some studios at some point on one of these sessions about that and because you don't specifically need anything additional, really, do you? As opposed to other animators, you can work as any other animator can.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
yeah. Well, hopefully somebody will see you on here and offer you a good job. That's what I hope. We're going to have some questions from the audience. I hope shortly, and if people who are engaging online, you can put questions into the chat. And after we've spoken to John, we'll answer as many of those questions as we possibly can. So turning to Mr. Jonathan Mortimer, you've described yourself as an animation educator, John. What inspired you to to do that?
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, so I guess it's quite reminiscent from Paul and even Rebecca's story. So I have a big influence from both my father and my son. So my father was born hearing but lost some of his hearing when he was a child. So he is classified as partially deaf or hard of hearing. We communicate. He can still speak in English, but it's a lot of lip reading we communicate together with. He only recently got his hearing aids, so the majority of my life, that's how we communicate. My wife and I are learning BSL to support our son. He's not deaf, but he is on the autistic spectrum, and we're using BSL supported English to help him visualize what we're trying to get across to him. So with my dad, once again, quite a lot of what Paul mentions reminiscent to myself. Big fan of Akira, Japanese animation, and comic books. All that was introduced to me by my dad. Probably introduced a little too early to my brother and I for some of the more adult content, but it's all part of the fun. And when we were looking into what could we do to best support my son, we started looking at options, and we didn't see there was a great deal of ways to help inspire BSL users, or especially children, to learn BSL. So at home, I started to look into more inclusive animation. I started to animate BSL characters with 3D, with working with the deaf and hard of hearing communities to have input into that too. So yeah, we've had a crash course over the last number of years to help raise our game when it comes to signing.
Now, you just mentioned you've been working with deaf actors to sort of to interpret some of your work. And one of the clips that you sent me, which I'm going to play once I've just got it lined up here, illustrates that really well. So if you will indulge me just for a second, I will play that in.
Picture this. Our story begins with a student on their first day at college. She's eager to learn as much as she can about animation. But there's a problem. She is left clueless when her lecturer starts using animation terms, and everyone else just seems to understand. This language gap puts sign language users at a massive disadvantage at learning or even accessing information about the animation, visual effects, or games industries. It's like looking up a dictionary and finding a blank page. Or it's like someone switching off the subtitles. Just like this. So, ultimately, who does this affect? There are an estimated 500,000 people in the United States that use American Sign Language as their native language, with over 70 million sign language users worldwide and 300 distinct sign languages in the world. By addressing this language gap, we can create more opportunities in education and within industry, and inspire more students to consider a career in animation or games.
It's a 6 or 7 minute clip, but again, I think that's kind of interesting because you're almost talking to the industry as much as an audience there. And this goes back again to what Rebecca was saying, what Paul's saying, what Shabaaz has been saying about how you include people with, in this case, I think more hearing loss than sight loss into the industry, how you attract them into the industry, how you convince the industry that people with hearing loss can become part of it. And is that very much what that particular clip is about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very keen to, well, Paul actually had a scene within that animation as well. But I was very keen to use deaf artists as much as possible, hard of hearing artists where possible. And I managed to get some funding to get Amy Murray, who's our actor. And I was keen to just try and elicit more of a response and then try and push that in further animations to try and see what can we do to make the interpreter part of the performance more fun. So for example, if you have the interpreter here, Big Dinosaur comes in, the signer is signing, but also checking out in case the dinosaur tries to nibble them, or maybe has to duck under because the tail's going round. Just something fun and engaging for kids, and it's not putting the interpreter in as in post. They're very much part of the storytelling from the word go. And once again, completely selfishly trying to do what would my son engage with as an initial kind of point of interest. How do I help him feel like he is not doing anything wrong by practicing the sign language and trying to communicate with us.
Understood. And I'm going to play your other clip in a second as well, which is more of an animated piece than a sort of something to aim at the industry. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that before I play it?
Yes, of course. So I've kind of spawned off of numerous different ways. I could talk for hours, my apologies, but different ways that we could investigate or explore what could be more inclusive animation. Essentially, my interpretation is going right back to some of the quote-unquote old animation my father inspired me with, Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry, all the good stuff there, which is principally visually told that doesn't rely on a verbal narrative. For the clip I think you're going to show, that's very much a pitch that I'm taking around to different studios, looking to hire in, once given the green light, hire in as many deaf, hard of hearing artists be involved as well. And from that, it's visual told. So what you see on screen is just a completely told by visual narrative. We're also looking into what can we do with sound. So even if, for example, someone that's hard of hearing or from the deaf communities can't hear the sound, is there a way that we can actually make them feel the sound? So we've actually contacted a couple of Scottish percussion musicians and artists to see what can we do to get that response. Because as Shabaaz said, music is 50% of the animation. What can we do to make it feel, even if that's maybe a live performance in which we put speakers, put something down and get people to take their shoes off so they can feel the vibrations or something. That's what we're trying to explore. And with your help, maybe we can do that together.
Okay, let me play the clip. Sorry, I'm doing something else here. Apologies, not quite sure what was going on there. No, obviously that, as you said, that's a story that was told without dialogue, but it's still very clear what that story is. And there are obviously expressions on the characters. So it looks like you've sort of simplified everything and pared everything back and just focused on characterization in order to tell the story, which again is visual, but
Absolutely, yeah. So that's exactly right. What can I do to make it as understandable as possible? Different colors, shapes. We try to pull back as possible. What you saw is essentially my experience of lockdown. My wife's a GP, so she was working in a hospital during lockdown. So what you see, and these are recurrent episodes of that father getting turned into numerous different characters, was how I survived lockdown with two small children, trying to keep things as entertaining and as jazzy as possible, while my wife went out and did her stuff. And yeah, so yeah, every adventure there is basically told with blood, sweat, tears. That's just from me.
well, it's fabulous. I tried to do a preschool show some time ago without dialogue and failed miserably. And we showed it to it was a preschool show, as I said, some young children. They had not a clue what was going on. So I applaud you, because that, it may have escaped your notice. I'm not a preschool child, but I did really understand what was going on. So thank you all. That's, I think, gives a good idea of the four of you, where you're coming from, what you do, how you approach things. So I'm hoping we might get some questions in from the audience as we chat. But I wanted to ask some general questions of you. Shabaaz has answered this a bit, so this is a question more to Rebecca, Paul, and John. Have you ever encountered any form of prejudice or reluctance to engage from anyone in terms of your work because of where you know, sight loss, hearing loss? And if you did, how did you deal with it? Rebecca, can I start with you on that one?
Yeah, I'm smiling because of course I have. You know, like you know, yes, of course I have, because if the perception of what you are is very different from what you actually are and what your actual skills are. And honestly, I really think the biggest disabling factor in all of this is the attitudinal barriers faced by people with different disabilities, by non-disabled people, or indeed by other disabled people who don't have the same disability. But the perception that, like Shabaaz says, oh, you can't, the art teacher says you can't do art. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing. Monet painted the most beautiful work after losing his sight. So this notion that you can't be an artist without full sight is just crackers. So anyway, in terms of barriers, yes, I have. I mean, I've sat in front of commissioners and been asked, who's the creative lead on this, after pitching the whole thing myself. You know, yes, all the time. But the thing is that I say is, what you have to do is, if you want to be a creator and you're disabled, you can't wait for other people. You have to do it yourself, and then you have to show them how good you are. Because if you knock on their door and you say, I'm deaf and I'm blind, they'll just go, ooh, that's terrifying, and off they run. So my biggest bit of advice to people is, if you want to create, if it's coming from you as an internal driver to create, then show them rather than tell them.
That's fair enough. And Paul, if I could ask the same question of you, you know, have you faced prejudice and lack of engagement because you're deaf? And if you have, how have you dealt with that?
So I've never worked within the industry as such. For myself, I've worked as a freelance artist. So I've done 3 commissioned pieces of work. So I've done some work with John, and then also with another deaf creator, John Smith, who is a deaf comedian. He asked me to create an animation to start before, so he could use before he starts his performances. So most of my work in film and animation, as it just comes from my heart. So I've just been really eager to get my passion out. So other projects like the theatre and the workshops, the animation, sorry, bear with me, the animation workshops that I've done, I do get income from the theatre side of work, but really the animation that I do, it is a love project. So that's why I continue to do that work rather than for the monetary value. And I've not really faced any prejudice that I've come across. The only thing would be if people didn't want to pay for interpreters, for example. That becomes a barrier, because accessing to the information for projects to go ahead would not be available. So yeah, there are a few barriers there, but mainly linked to the communication and having access to that communication on the funding side of things.
And are there any funds, any sort of disability allowances and things that you can apply for? I mean, my brother had epilepsy, which was caused actually by a brain tumor, and he was able to access an allowance because he couldn't drive, so he could get to work. So there was a disability allowance to allow him to get from home to work. There's nothing like that for interpreters.
Yes, I do use the Access to Work scheme, but it is very small in terms of the budget that you're given. And based in the Northeast, it's really not enough to cover what the hours would be. So it is a little bit of a battle to get the funds that you need. And obviously there have been some cuts. So it is fundamentally there, but difficult to access.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, and I think that's all sort of good advice for people out there who are facing some of the barriers that we've been talking about as we go along, to know that there are some opportunities that or places that you can go to try and ease those barriers. Now we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I want to ask each of you one quick final question. And I suppose it refers back to what we've just been talking. And John, I'll start with you. The question is, what more do you think can be done to engage with artists and audiences who are deaf or have sight loss?
That's a very interesting question, because I guess my experience ties into a little bit of the previous question. So my apologies, I'll be quick as I can. So I've had questions from both the hearing community and, of course, from deaf and hard of hearing communities about why I do what I do. So I find that for myself, I stress, my family background, why I'm doing it. Nothing wrong about that. But I personally also stress that I'm not making anything for any community. I'm making it with the community. So I try my very best to work with as many communities as possible to keep it as authentic as possible. In Scotland, we have the BSL Scotland Act 2015, which does allow us, workplaces should engage with paying for interpreters and everything else. I've got some funds in myself, so I'm hoping to work with Paul again and some other artists. I'd encourage them to reach out so we can tell these authentic stories together. Hopefully.
Thank you. Shabaaz, very quickly, one thing that you think could be done to make life easier for you and for other people with sight loss?
I think just being more open-minded and giving opportunities that, and just being thoughtful in the fact that that we can do as much as anyone else, and that our sight loss or hearing loss doesn't affect our work capability, in the fact that we can't do as much as what other people can do. So yeah.
Rebecca?
I think there needs to be a paradigm shift on the part of the entire industry about disabled people, to be honest. That actually they need to understand that this is untapped culture and untapped talent, and that when you allow it to come through, you may find extraordinary things. We're always looking for new ways of doing things in the world, new art, new whatevers, and diverse voices and diverse talents and diverse ways of looking at things can bring out stuff that's completely unexpected and quite brilliant.
Thank you. And finally, Paul, what's the one thing that you think could happen in order for people who are deaf or have sight loss to engage with the creative industries?
It's a really hard question. Could you clarify? Just
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
in the conversations we've been having, Shabaaz mentioned that, some people have been put off hiring him because they don't think he can do the job. Rebecca's mentioned that, and John the same, that, people just don't understand what they're missing by not engaging with people who are deaf or have sight loss. If you had a magic wand which you could wave, what would your wish be for that to change?
Okay. I wish that all deaf and disabled people can work together to create animation and just more access, those barriers just taken away completely. I know that interpreters can be expensive and that can sometimes put people off, or they might not want to work with interpreters, but it's about getting funding, getting access. That access is needed, so it's about making sure that that access is there so that we can all kind of work together and collaboratively. For deaf animators, it's about doing workshops and doing animations and kind of showing that interest, and showing in the future, showing deaf children and young people that in the future you can become an animator. There's no, with the barriers there, and about encouraging more people into that field and removing those barriers for deaf people and deaf children in the future.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to have to stop it there. We have overrun slightly, so I apologise to the people in the background. But I would like to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Jonathan, Paul, Rebecca, and Shabaaz for being so candid, honest, and letting me into their world. It's and talking about this, and also to Hayley and Melissa for guiding through us through today. It's been fabulous. Thank you so much. I hope the audience have got a lot out of it. We'll say goodbye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.